Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining this session. I'm here with Andreina Seijas and myself. My name is Mirik Milan. Yeah, I think I'm super proud that we can be speaking at this conference. Thank you, of course, Charles, and everybody who knows him. He's a brilliant mind and somebody who inspired us a lot in our work as yeah, people that shape the night. So we're gonna take a deep dive into night fever, or the lack of it, of course, at this moment. Night, the night or nightlife is facing one of the biggest challenges in the world at the moment in the current pandemic. But there's hope for the future. I think that's really important. There's hope for the future, and well, in the coming 50 minutes or so, Andreina and I are going to take you into the world of nighttime governance, really an emerging policy field. And yeah, maybe you will hear a couple of things you haven't heard before, but I hope you enjoy the session. I'm going to switch over to presentation mode now. Yeah, I'm going to talk about for 10-15 minutes about yeah, how this whole how everything developed, and then Andreina will talk more about where nighttime governance is at the moment. So I hope everybody can see my screen perfectly. So here we go. So I'm part of a small consultancy called Vibe Lab. We help to shape and build vibrant nights. And I think our key message is, at least for this little talk, is that we really have to collaborate. And we can only build back a vibrant nightlife if we really collaborate, if we have the top down and bottom up in place when it comes to governance structures, that the creative communities and the policymakers really have to work together. And that is a key message that we always speak, because the nighttime governance is actually, yeah, a very, it's the night is something, there's a lot of stakeholders involved, and we really need to collaborate and have this multi-stakeholder approach, and doing things differently, of course, all in mind of the Creative Bureaucracy Festival. So we at Vibe Lab, as strategists, we help to shape the night, and we really want to change the stigma over that the night is only about overindulgence, littering, and noise, and it really work on the power that the night has to offer, and the talent development that is happening at night. My business partner from Berlin is the Club Commissioner from Berlin, a very influential organization, association, and is one of the drivers behind yeah, the club culture and the economic impact it has in Berlin. So a vibrant night is so important, and it mirrors a lot of creativity, diversity, and progression of a city. Here is where talent gets developed and where people find out new things. Also, myself, it helped me to shape me in who I am today. But often when we speak to cities, they asked us like, what does a vibrant city look like? And we often hear people say, well, we have good coffee chains and we have good franchises all in the world, over the world, and but that's not what shapes the night. This is really what shapes the night. It's people getting together. It's unexpected meetups. It's those places which yeah, make you feel inspired and change your perception. And also the night is a place where the most proactive, forward-thinking, and open-minded people come together. This is where we explore and where we learn and we see new things. But it's also where we get to know different things and explore music. But also think about all the talent development which is happening at night. It's not only the people on the stage, it's also the people surrounding it. And I often point to this picture and I say, like, how many creative jobs do you see in this picture? Well, it's of course the photographer that's taking the picture. It's the VJ in the background that is doing the editing, also learning on the job. It's the stage design, the light design, the performers on the stage, the body paint. The lady has there was body paint in this picture as well. So there's 7 or 8 creative jobs already connected to one photo. And the night really helps to shape the identity of cities. But we also have to say is that, like, definitely nightlife was in a corner where it was already really tough due to gentrification. And a lot of creative communities, they need space. They need accessible and affordable space to develop to develop those talents, but also to come together and to innovate, because nobody wants to live in a monoculture city. Everybody wants to live in a vibrant place. But that's also the reason why definitely the creative communities are often the first victims of their own success. So when it comes to nighttime governance, we're not only speaking about those vibrant places and those famous music venues where everybody heard of. We're speaking about a lot more topics. And this includes safety, tourism, creative industry, transportation, of course, attracting and developing talents, but also what is happening on neighborhood level. Health and protection. If people work long hours, what does it mean for them? Of course, diversity and inclusion. How can we make sure that venues, but also other places, are accessible for all workers? We have to think about policies. What is happening with rules and regulations, and what about zoning? Of course, placemaking and city planning, and of course art and culture, and definitely funding around it. So all these topics are connected to nighttime governance and are important for a vibrant nighttime governance. So after years of working in this space, we came up with these ingredients to create a buzz. When I was the night mayor of Amsterdam, a position I helped to create back in 2012, we constantly came into this same process. We saw that there was three big components that always have to be in place to create this cultural vibrant city. And it's the creative community, the people that create the content, but also the people that don't have so much knowledge or impact on government. It's the creative space. So those are the venues and the incubators, which are so important for people to develop and to produce. And of course, and that is the last one, and that's like I think the level what we bring on top is the policy framework. And when these things all align, then you really get these cultural vibrant cities. And in a later stage, I will address, I give an example on how this functions in real life. So I also touched on it just before, and I'm here with, I can now say, my apologies for the punctuation, because it's now Dr. Andreina Seijas, the first doctoral degree, PhD degree in nighttime governance, actually. And earlier this year, we were very happy that the paper was published in Urban Studies. Governing the Nighttime City, the Rise of Night Mayors as a New Form of Urban Governance After Dark. It was a quantitative study about the emerging role of the night mayor. And there have been nighttime advocacy groups and night mayors for quite some time. But I think really, and that's some of the results that came really from 2014 to 2016, and definitely after 2016, there was a huge growth of cities that are joining this movement of thinking about their nighttime governance and understand more, wanting to learn and understand what is happening in the space and how they can deal with the problems and the issues which are there. So if your city is not on this list yet, please, or if you are in government, then reach out to your local scene or reach out to us, and we will love to connect you and maybe set up an office of nightlife or a night mayor yourself. What was really interesting is when you're seeing this global map that it's spread all over the city, and Andreina will talk a little bit more about it in a minute. But what is really interesting to see is whether this night mayor is positioned inside or outside city government. They are all advocacy roles, and that is something which is very important to underline, because none of the night mayors in the world have the power to change laws or have the power to give out a license to an establishment. But they're all advocating, sometimes from outside city government as an advocacy group or an independent non-for-profit. But they all have something in common. They are translators. They are translators between two worlds. And this is really the translation. That's really what needs to happen for everybody to understand what the needs, what the challenges are, and actually how we can bring all those stakeholders together to actually improve life at night, but also the quality of life in cities, and making them more productive and making them more exciting to live in. So this is a quick overview of people. We definitely need more women on the space. We definitely need more diversity when it also comes to the night mayor positions. But what is good to know is that New York and London have a female night mayor, and I'm really happy about that. So I hope we can continue to balance it out better in the future. We have spoken and met people all over the world in the recent years to really bring those people together, and I hope this movement will continue to grow over the coming years. But when we look at cities, we also have to understand and we have to map out what is going on. When it comes to the night mayor position, it's often really reactive. A venue shuts down, a music festival is under threat, and really have to now take a deeper dive into what is happening in cities. And therefore, we created this research project, which is called the Creative Footprint. And the Creative Footprint really indexes creative space in cities. We have now done the research in 3 cities, and we have researched more than 2,000 creative spaces in cities. And one of the things which really stood out, and it's something which is now also definitely when it comes to the pandemic, is also very important to mention, is that when spaces are multidisciplinary, they're often more resilient to combat any crisis or changes in policies that might happen. And having multidisciplinary spaces is really what I think is for me the view on the future. And whether these spaces go for 24 hours, when they have multiple functions, that's really important. But it's really, for now, and definitely with the pandemic, it's really important to even know where these spaces are and how they operate. And definitely when you can see, so I pulled up a little map from Manhattan, and this is something we definitely have to bring back, or this is of course New York. Where the ground prices are higher, there's less experimental content. And the thinking behind the Creative Footprint is the more experimental content, the more innovations will happen. So we always have to figure out, okay, how can we keep a balance? And when nightlife is pushed out of a neighborhood because they help to develop or gentrify the neighborhood, we have to think about, okay, how can we harness the power of the market to make sure that we keep those spaces and that we keep those spaces, but also that it's still possible for them to create that experimental content, which will help to innovate the city and make the city more interesting on the long run. One of my good friends and a venue operator here in Amsterdam dropped this quote. And definitely when we look at the pandemic, we have to also understand what are we trying to save and how are we going to build it back. So if we make nightlife clinical, we lose its essence. And for me, that's so true. If you would say you have to go into a music venue, you can't touch anyone. If you have to go into a music venue wearing a mouth cap so you don't see facial expressions. When people go out at night, or even if they're working, they have something in common. They are out in the dark, and that's really a moment where people can also find neutral ground on which they stand, and that's why we need to protect that essence. And that was something that we felt really strongly about when this pandemic hit. At the beginning of the pandemic, we thought, well, we have such an enormous task at hand. In March, all the venues closed down. And this resulted in, we came together with our friends and the people that working on nighttime governance, and we said we have to do something. So we brought together all the night mayors and nightlife advocates. We brought them together in one group, WhatsApp group, how that goes nowadays. But then secondly, we also brought together all the nighttime scientists, people that are working in urban planning and governance at the moment. And out of this group came the idea, well, there are so many interesting information, and there are so many practical guides and tools that you can use to to build back that industry or to save it, because we need this urge of socializing. I think now it has shown, the pandemic has shown that it's really important, that socializing is really an intrinsic part of who we are as human beings. There were ideas from all over the world coming in our way, and finding our way to our platform, and that was really important at that moment at the beginning. But it also have led to something else. It really sparked this idea, we have to do something, and that's why we are always advocating for the night, and we're always trying to improve them and make it better. And therefore we came together with a brilliant group of people, and we started to working on something which is called the Global Nighttime Recovery Plan. And we said, like, yeah, global, it's a big word. And that means that you have to, have to be a sort of diligence, making sure that all the different voices are represented. But we thought we could call it global because all the night mayors are connected to this project, and helping out and sharing insights and best practices. We have now delivered 2 chapters. We are working together with brilliant minds from PEM Praxis, but also Fraunhofer and the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation. It's really bringing all those ideas together. We always ask a specialist to lead the chapter, and we're going into the chapters. We now spoke about what is happening with open air, because in COVID times, everything changes so quickly. We are now already in our second wave here in the Netherlands. So everything is changing. So we are delivering 1 chapter every month, and giving practical guides and insights and know-how how to deal with this negative impact. And we will be speaking also about innovations and the 24-hour city. We will definitely also speak about how is financial support. So everything we do is to make sure that we save that vibrant industry, that we make sure that we can still build those connections in the future. And this is, of course, open source and freely available to download. So we will leave it in the notes where you can find it if you're more interested to learn what we have brought together. I'm just gonna touch on a few case studies we have in the Global Nighttime Recovery Plan. And one of them is, and that's what you've seen happening in the beginning of the pandemic, venues and bars and restaurants, they were given the ability to also bring their spaces outside and make bigger patios or terraces where they can serve the drinks, etc. But it's also very important to think about, okay, what is this new? And the city has to think about, okay, what has this new situation has to do for the city? And managing sound in the nighttime economy and in nightlife is one of the key aspects. So in this report, you can read all a lot about how this can be approached, but also how it can be approached differently. What are the new ways to monitor sound as well? Because we need to keep on innovating this space to make sure that our cities are livable and everybody is enjoying it so much. And then secondly, on the second chapter, the future of dance floors, we looked at what venues were doing to make sure that they are still existing. And sorry, my apologies. This is on the top is a photo of Village Underground, a very amazing live music venue in London, in East London. And it's also a multidisciplinary space. They also have a co-working space on the rooftop with little trams, which is also very amazing. But actually what they did in the height of the pandemic, they changed their space into a bicycle park, just to get a bit of revenue in. And it really hurts my heart, because of course I want to see a great up and emerging band playing that space. But these are some things that people were thought of, like, okay, what can we do? But also another case study was from Torino in Italy, in Turin. They have created a virtual space, a virtual dance floor, where everybody could create their own avatar and join into the party. And it's also quite interesting because sometimes people can't go out because of work, because of the finance, because you need to have money, of course, to go out and to spend money. So that also might create a threshold that for people to go in. And in the digital space, we definitely can come together. It is nothing compared to the real deal. So, but it's a good way to socialize and to know what's going on and to keep a finger on the pulse in some development. So definitely, please have a look on nighttime.org and download the chapters, and more will be coming. We always do like a meet the authors piece. Where we have a large Zoom call where people can meet the authors and talk more in detail, and we have updates from global players to speak about, okay, what is the new innovations. So if you have a team that is focused on the nighttime economy, please invite them to join one of those sessions. Some nice people wrote about the work that we have done, and I think that might be interesting to you if you want to take a more deeper dive. So this rounds up my piece. I'm going to hand over to Andreina, so that we can have a conversation, also take a bit of a deeper dive into nighttime governance. Thank you for this moment, and I will stop staring at my screen now.
Thanks, Mirik, and hi, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here and to share this space and conversation with Mirik, with whom I've been collaborating and working for some time now. As he mentioned, I'm an international consultant specializing in nighttime planning and governance, and I just recently finished my doctoral studies at the Harvard Graduate School of Design, where I specialize in this novel field of research and practice. Mirik likes to say that I'm the first PhD on the topic. It's a novel field. There's more and more people getting interested, and I invite people out there, researchers, professionals, to get involved in this new realm of planning that is concerned on how we can use and how we can activate cities at night in a more proactive way. I also recently founded Night Tent, which is an international consulting firm to specialize in these topics, and I'm working with several cities, mostly in Latin America, where I'm from. I'm originally from Venezuela. And as Mirik said, it's interesting when we think about the concept of nighttime governance. And it's important to mention, as he also well said, this has to do with collaboration. So that's why we talk about governance instead of government, because it involves a wide range of state and non-state actors that are concerned with managing the city at night, which is a very complicated task and a very complicated realm. And when we think about it, it's the other half of the day. So when we think about the other 12 hours of the day that haven't been taken into account, and when I say 12 hours, it's because when we talk about the nighttime economy, when we talk about the night, the portable or the most internationally used definition has to do with 6 p.m., from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. So we talk about the other 12 hours of the day that have to do with nighttime activity that involves not only leisure, culture, and entertainment, but also other productive activities that happen after dark. And one important thing is to situate ourselves when we think about the current context. And I'm speaking here from an urban planning perspective, but also from the perspective, as I said, of this new and growing field. It's important to situate ourselves in what was happening with the nighttime economy and with nighttime governance before the current COVID-19 crisis started. And that situates ourselves within the work that Mirik and other experts have been doing with the nighttime recovery plan. And it's important to know that the night has been traditionally a highly restrictive space. When you think about nighttime regulations, we think the first thing that comes to mind perhaps is the very strong presence of the police at night to govern nighttime spaces, and also the use of very restrictive measures such as curfews or dancing bans and all kinds of restrictions that operate on the premise that to regulate and to better coordinate nighttime activity, you have to reduce nighttime activity or reduce the places, restrict the places where nighttime activity can occur. And that's the premise behind curfews. But we've seen how over the past 30 years, three decades, this has begun to change. And we've seen how the night has been moving slowly from a very restrictive space to a more celebratory space, where we recognize the importance of the night as a space of opportunity, as a space to meet others with huge contributions for city coffers, not only in terms of jobs and added revenue, but also in terms of, as Mirik was saying before, tourists' vibrancy for cities. So the night has become increasingly recognized as a very important aspect in cities' agendas that needs to be governed and planned for more proactively, as I said before. However, when we hit 2020, we see that nightlife and hospitality and most nighttime activities were already vulnerable. And the reason for this is that, as Mirik also said, we already saw since 2015, the past 5 years, we've seen so many studies that claim and that reveal the very important disappearance of night venues and created spaces around the world, as well as how nighttime industries, although they've been growing steadily over the past decade, they're known for their low profit margins and how they have limited worker protection. So in this context, we see the current crisis. We see how we now see curfews everywhere. We now see restrictions everywhere. So although we moved from restrictive to more open, we're going back to restrictive policies when it comes to the night. And this is what I like to call the pendulum effect, which happens often when it comes to the night. So when we think about the night, every time something happens, something unexpected happens, some event happens, we tend to oscillate from more open and proactive measures to more restrictive ones. And this often happens without having scientific evidence or having enough resources to actually validate the need for these policies. So that's something to have in mind, and something that I'm trying to advocate through my work is the more data-driven approach to nighttime governance, to use data and to use to think about the night as a field that needs to be researched and understood like any other. And one important thing that has to do with this is that when we think about what's happening currently with the current crisis and how different cities have been responding to the pandemic and to the needs to prevent this pandemic from expanding further, we've seen some inconsistency in the way enforcement measures have been displayed. And this inconsistency has many implications, and one of them is perception. Because when we see how cities are oscillating very quickly from opening or reopening to then going to a curfew and going back to reopening, this creates many issues with trust in patrons and in citizens. So this leads to complicating the situation for business owners, for small business owners, when already in most cases it is venue operators who take the blame for these inconsistencies. So it's important to think about nighttime governance in this broad sense, how we think about these different stakeholders are involved in managing the city at night. So we have to go beyond thinking about the police and state actors and incorporating other actors. Like Mirik was saying, night mayors, nighttime advocates have become a very important part of this puzzle, and are very key partners in revealing this information and in gathering data, in tracking how nighttime activities happening in cities to better inform these policies in the long term. So I think this is a summary of what's nighttime governance and what's happening in the current situation. And we can talk about, maybe Mirik, we can maybe talk about a little bit about what are the challenges that the specific challenges and the specific solutions that we envision for this as a result of the pandemic.
Yes, for sure, and thank you, Andreina, for highlighting that. Yeah, what I see happening in many cities in the world, and what also happened, definitely, it's very difficult to penetrate the city's nightlife from your office in City Hall, and therefore it's really important that there's a whole range of stakeholders that can join the conversation and actually, as Andreina was saying, work from a knowledge-based approach, because it's really often the underlying emotions which determine policy which is being created, and definitely it's too loud, too noisy, too much, and etc. But what is, and definitely with this pandemic, with the economic crisis we are in today, we also have to think about, okay, how will music events and festivals and food markets and these, how will they be a vehicle to again build up our cities? What you can see is that cities that lean very much on the service industries, like London, they're also hit very hard when it comes to this pandemic. And therefore, I think it's important, and I touched on it briefly before, really having, so when it comes to creative bureaucracy, when it comes to policy making for our cities, I really hope that cities take this moment to review the licensing schemes and to review the policies they have at this moment installed, and think about, okay, how after this pandemic are we going to program the city? And one of the examples I often like to use, and which I'm still also very proud of, was the introduction of 24-hour licenses in Amsterdam. Under the strong lead of our mayor, Eberhard van der Laan, we were able to introduce these 24-hour licenses for 10 bars and clubs. And what was interesting about this approach is that for the first time, we looked at the creative content these venues were producing, instead of just looking at the practical side of things, like, does this place have 4 walls, a roof, and a bouncer in front of the door, basically. So in our strategy, we said we want these places to be multidisciplinary, to have a bar, gallery, co-working space, of course, a vibrant nightlife area, but really making them multifunctional. Because when the building is used in a 24-hour cycle, definitely you can see this happening also now. The venues that are 24-hour and that have multiple functions, they're also more resilient because they're not leaning only on their nightlife activity. But what is interesting about this approach, and that's what I hope that cities will do, is think about, okay, how can we make sure that these venues that are places where we can socialize, how can we make sure that they are not only used for area development, because really often nightlife and music venues are really often to go into rundown venue or to transform industrial areas. That has happened, of course, a lot, and it came also out of our research in urban studies, that nightlife is really often to transform industrial areas. But your industrial area of 15 or 20 years ago is probably your new city center at the moment. And this will continue to grow as our cities will grow, and we will pull in more and more residents into the city. So what I really hope is that cities will re-evaluate their approach, that they think about not only thinking about what is right, but what we have to do, and how can we program the city in a way, and how can we adjust the zoning and licensing laws that we aim for these creative businesses with a multi-layered approach.
Yes, in that same line, Mirik, I always think about, when you talk about the 24-hour permits in Amsterdam, I always think about this great piece from that was published in the Boston Globe in 2014, if I'm not wrong, by Ed Glaser, by Harvard professor Ed Glaser, and it was titled "Better Nightlife Through Experimentation." And I think that the title summarizes very well what this approach is all about, which is looking at nightlife as a space of opportunity where we can experiment and test new models of collaboration and new models of coexistence. And something you also mentioned that's very key to this whole process is that over the past 30 years, we saw how nightlife became emerged in conjunction with this cultural turn that we saw in cities and with the revitalization of post-industrial areas in cities. But now we're seeing shifts. We're seeing the shifting dynamics in city areas. And a key one of them is how we see this mixed use neighborhoods, where you see now these different activities coexisting and the frictions that are created between them. So you have you have residential areas that are now surrounding existing cultural venues, maybe music venues that have been there forever, and now they're surrounded by these new residential areas. And it's a matter of time for these neighbors to complain or to make to communicate, get their voices out, because they're not happy with noise or with crowds or with the congestion that can be created around nighttime activity. So the question is, how can we then create the infrastructure to allow for this coexistence of uses? And one thing that is very interesting from an urban planning perspective is how traditionally nighttime activity has been separated from other uses, and it's been considered inherently incompatible with other uses. And that's why you see how nighttime activity was placed in specialized districts, nightlife districts with special zoning, with special hours, with special regulations overall. But now we see that how this is no longer possible in many parts of the world, and then you need to incorporate nighttime uses with other uses in a more orderly and in a more in a better way, in a more planned way. So I think that's one of the main challenges. And when it comes to the current crisis, and I think it's important because we've talked about this before in other events. There's tons of reimagining happening right now. There's also tons of speculation, and I do think that this crisis is already reshaping many aspects, and it's accelerating many things that were already happening, such as the rise of e-commerce or contactless payments, or the decentralization of activity in cities, and this idea such as the 15-minute city have become more prominent than ever. We see these trends are being accelerated. However, there's things that won't change. And we need to, the main question is when we think about, so the Global Nighttime Recovery Plan is putting forward all kinds of practices, and we like to call them practices instead of best practices, because the ideas that we're testing, right? We're experimenting with these policies and these ideas, and we need to gather the data to be able to know if they're best practices or not. But the beauty of these practices is that they provide new avenues of considering how we can do things at night, and that they can help us determine which of these practices will be here to stay. The question is, which of these ideas, which of these solutions will be here to stay? And I think that's something that we need to ask ourselves. And for instance, I was just reading yesterday how in New York City, the open streets and open restaurants program it's been announced that it's going to be permanent. And it's interesting how something that emerged as, a way of giving a lifeline to restaurants in the city of New York now has become a permanent program that might change, what might create this cafe culture in a city that had lost part of the use of its public spaces. So it's interesting how we ask the question at this point of the pandemic, how we start asking the question, which of these solutions are here to stay, and which of these solutions will change the distribution of uses in cities, particularly at night. And one last point is that I think it's important to think about, when we think about social distancing, think about distancing not only in terms of space, but also in terms of time. And going back to the 24-hour permits, that is something that I think Amsterdam has been a remarkable pioneer in this sense, by using time as a means to distribute activity in city areas and to redistribute activity in city areas in order to have a less congested center and to have more inclusive and better distributed nighttime activity in the city. And it's important, as Mirik was saying, nightlife goes beyond having great lights and a great sound system. Nightlife is also about the software, and it's about the codes and the behavioral norms that govern how we behave at night. And it's also about the institutions, the people, from more formal to less formal, that are involved in managing this ecosystem in a way that it's safe and that it's inclusive and sustainable.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with you. There are some actually some big challenges in my opinion, and I would like you, Andreina, to touch a little bit on. You mentioned before about also the use of data and understanding what role this could have in cities, and this is also something we hope to accomplish with the Global Nighttime Recovery Plan. So if there's anyone watching and is interested in doing a pilot in their city, in a certain neighborhood, or in a street or an area, then we are very willing to see if that's possible. We can do something like that. But I think there's a big challenge at the moment. Of course, most of our nighttime activity is stopped at the moment. But there's also another problem which we have, and one of the big problems is as long as nighttime activity is seen as work and as it's seen as entertainment and not as work, we have a lot of difficulties advocating for ourselves or showing what the value is. Because we have all seen, and there's many examples. Because one of them is in the Netherlands, the economic impact of the electronic music scene, so dance music scene, is more than, it was 2017 already, was more than 800 million euros on a yearly basis. So we're not speaking about a small little industry. We're speaking about big things, but but really often, and definitely now, you see that the approach definitely in this pandemic is to say, well, we have to stop it. We want to have less nighttime activity because then there will be less people being infected. But what I'm missing a little bit in this discussion is, why aren't we trying out new things? Why are we not dedicating a square or a park or another place where people can socialize in the outdoors with, of course, the distance, the 1.5 meter distance? And why don't we give an opportunity for these nighttime establishments to do something for their community and still being able to operate? But why are we only focusing on, okay, now we have to shut this down? And I think that it's a missed opportunity, and that I think that it's still because we or the night is not seen as work; it's seen as fun. But there's like a whole generation that misses the opportunity for that talent development, and we have to really protect the pipeline of talent development. And therefore, it's also so important to keep gathering data, like how many businesses are we losing, how many spaces are we losing. And maybe you can touch briefly, Andreina, on what opportunities do you see for the use of data when it comes to the nighttime economy and to the night in general.
Yes, definitely. In the context of the current crisis, we've seen how it's been a great opportunity for cities to be proactive by gathering data. For instance, by understanding specifically how many people have been affected, whose jobs have been affected by the closures and by the restrictions in the industry. We've seen how many cities around the world have started surveys to gather this information in a very simple way. This survey, actually a template of this survey is available in nighttime.org, and it's interesting how the same survey has been translated to several languages. I helped, for instance, translate it to Spanish, and we implemented it in Tegucigalpa in Honduras to get a sense of how many workers and different members of this ecosystem of the nighttime economy in the city were affected by the closures. And it's been also implemented in Spain and all over the US, in other parts of Europe. So it's great how these instruments, this is an example of a practice that can be easily transferred to different parts of the world and could be a hands-on instrument for cities to gather information on their nighttime economies. Because something that is very important, something that was already happening before the crisis, is that we saw how different city governments were starting to gather information on the size and the trying to characterize these ecosystems to understand how big it is, how many people work for the nighttime economy, what is the nighttime economy. Because also, as I said before, there's this portable definition that we like to use from 6 to 6, but in some contexts, in some cases, in some cities, they have a different cultural need, or even it's a matter of darkness. Maybe the conception of darkness changes this idea of the nighttime economy. So it's important to take those local factors and context into account. But also, going back to the challenges we were talking about before, it's important. A very important concept that has come up throughout this crisis is flexibility, and how we need to be more flexible when it comes to certain regulations. And part of this idea of testing and experimenting has to do it's not about creating new things from scratch, but also how we can update existing policies by tweaking certain specific elements and measuring what their impact is. And that can range from looking at the existing curfews, looking at regulations around the alcohol consumption, or even thinking about ways in which we can promote greater nighttime activity that has nothing to do with alcohol consumption. And I think I have to mention a very interesting example, which is Sydney. Cities like Sydney have been a very important international reference of looking at this crisis as an opportunity to reimagine and reshape and strengthen their nighttime economy by putting together a comprehensive and long-term strategy that looks at fixing this broken system. Particularly, the broken system has to do with licensing, elements, with planning elements, but also by understanding how we can experiment and make them better by gathering information about this. And also, as I said before, I think it's great that we recognize which of these practices are here to stay. And I was reading a very interesting piece last night from the Harvard Business Review, and it pointed out how the nature of work it's post-pandemic nature of work will change for good, and how that's going to impact other aspects of the way we live. And it was actually mentioning how the future of work can learn from hospitality. And we see how we think about a hotel, when we think about hospitality venues that combine different sort of activities in one place, where you have a hotel that has a gym in the first floor to take advantage of a larger floor plan, but then you have on the top floor you have a bar with a nice view. How we can think about the future of offices, combining several amenities and several activities in one place, because we will see how, as I said before, there's a decentralization of many nighttime activities and daytime activities in cities. Instead of having one central downtown area where we have all the nighttime uses, we might see how this is distributed in different neighborhoods. How we will see perhaps a rise in neighborhood nighttime activity. People going to their neighborhood bars or neighborhood restaurants, favoring this close to home, this proximity to home as people work more from home, but also how these new nodes of activity will benefit from combining different amenities in one piece of real estate. So it's interesting how this is just to say how we can learn from each other, and how the wonder of this collaboration and the wonder of nighttime governance and the great advantage of this becoming a field of research and practice is that it can inform other fields and it can inform other trends that we're seeing as we react to this pandemic and as we prepare for future crises and shocks, as I'm sure COVID-19 will not be it's not the first and it won't be the last time that we deal with such important systemic shocks in the cities that we live in.
Yeah, thank you so much, and I fully agree with you. We're running towards the end of this session, and I just want to leave you with some key takeouts. I think really importantly, we have to serve people with facts instead of emotions. Definitely when it comes to nighttime governance, what are the facts underlying these issues, so we don't shut things down with the wrong arguments. We need to invest in creative content, not in furniture. Really think about how we're going to program the city. Think about what is the need, what is the identity of the city we want, and make sure that we have licensing and zoning porting towards that. We need to dare to fail, really start to do pilots, start to try to kickstart innovation by also doing things wrong and doing things differently. We talked about the top-down and bottom-up structure. You really need to have the top-down in place and really work effectively with with the organizations in the field that have first-hand information, and bringing those stakeholders together, the city residents, but also the nighttime operators and city government. When it comes to hopefully installing a night mayor or an office of nightlife in your city, really agree on it's an advocacy role. So whether this night mayor is inside city government, this person should have the power to also disagree with the city's administration and really to try to twist things around. And the last one, really, we have to really look at data, also pushing data for this creative space of the night. To monitor and map and understand where these spaces are, because if we don't know where they are, then we will never protect them, and before we know it, we will live in a monoculture neighborhood where nobody is really being happy. So having said that, I just want to say to everyone, stay healthy and stay safe, but also stay positive. We have to do this together, and there will be a moment where we can socialize again how we did before, and it will so sweet when it happens. So have a great rest of your Creative Bureaucracy Festival. Andreina, again, thanks so much for joining in, and also
Thank you.
Charles Landry for the invite as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye now.